Hello, I'm doing a movie review, and the movie I want to review is Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Now, as you can see, I have Rise of the Planet of the Apes on this DVD set with the original Planet of the Apes. Now, Rise of the Planet of the Apes came out in 2011, and this is essentially a prequel/reboot to the Planet of the Apes franchise. The film essentially acts as a prequel to the original film, however, it does retcon certain things. Like, the way I look at this movie is it's a prequel that's set in a slightly different continuity. Because there's certain problems with this being a direct prequel to the original film, so I consider this to be more of a prequel that just retcons certain things, like a prequel set in a slightly different continuity, but in the film it's heavily implied that it's leading up to a scenario very similar to what happened in the original Planet of the Apes film. Now, Rise of the Planet of the Apes is also kind of a loose remake of the film Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, which was the fourth film of the original series. Now, the plot of Rise of the Planet of the Apes is... the best way I can describe it is if Michael Crichton wrote a Planet of the Apes movie, that's probably how this movie would turn out to be. Now, the plot of Rise of the Planet of the Apes is it follows a scientist named Will, played by James Franco, whose father, played by John Lithgow, suffers from Alzheimer's disease. So now Will is working on a drug which could possibly cure the disease, but he tests the drug on a chimpanzee, which he calls Bright Eyes, and it seems that Bright Eyes is getting increasingly smarter and smarter, but what happens is one day Bright Eyes seems to go crazy and they have to kill her, but it turns out the only reason she was acting the way she was because she recently gave birth and she was only protecting her baby. So Will, he ends up taking this baby home, and it turns out some of the drug was passed on to the baby genetically, so this baby chimpanzee, which ends up getting named Caesar in the movie, he ends up being a lot smarter than your regular chimpanzee, and a lot of the film focuses on Will's relationship with Caesar, and you see Will raise Caesar as if it were his son, and what happens is he tests the drug, or he puts the drug into his father, and it seems to completely cure his father, but what happens is, unfortunately, one day, Will's father's disease ends up coming back with a vengeance, and then one thing leads to another, and Will's father ends up getting harassed by this asshole neighbor of theirs, and Caesar ends up attacking this neighbor, thinking that the neighbor was hurting Will's father, and so one thing leads to another, and Caesar ends up getting taken away from Will and put in this place with other apes, and essentially the plot line of the movie is in this place, Caesar and the other apes are extremely mistreated, and what happens is Caesar ends up organizing a rebellion, pretty much. Like, he ends up getting his hands on the drug and giving it to all the apes at this place and making the apes smarter, and the apes essentially rebel, and that's the basic plot line of Rise of the Planet of the Apes. But in the movie, when Will's father's disease comes back, he ends up creating an even stronger version of the drug, but this unfortunately creates a deadly virus. Now, the film also stars Brian Cox, who I know best as the guy who played Hannibal Lecter in the movie Manhunter. The film also stars Tom Felton, who I think most people would know as the guy who played Malfoy in the Harry Potter movies. Now, in the film, the apes are CGI, and they're played by people in motion capture suits. The lead ape in the movie is played by Andy Serkis, who, before before this played Gollum in the Lord of the Rings movies, and he played King Kong in the King Kong remake, and most recently he actually played, or did the motion capture for Godzilla in the new Godzilla reboot. Now, as I said earlier in this review, the film acts as kind of a prequel to the original film, because in the movie, you see like newspaper clippings of a group of astronauts who are lost in space, and it's heavily implied that that's Taylor's crew from the original film. However, there are a few problems with this being a direct prequel to the original film, because in the original film, you found out that the year that Taylor and his crew left Earth was sometime in the early 70s. This film is clearly set in present time, and also in the original film, it was heavily implied that what caused the end of the world and allowed the apes to take over was a nuclear war, and of course in the sequels that was pretty much confirmed. In this movie, you realize that it was actually a virus which brought about the end of the human race and allowed the apes to take over. So it is a prequel in a sense, but it does retcon certain things. That's why I said it's more of a prequel that's set in a slightly different continuity. However, it's heavily implied that the events of this movie are going to lead up to events very similar to what happened in the original film. Now, I personally really enjoyed Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Now, before this movie came out, I will admit I wasn't expecting much of the movie, because to me, the movie kind of looked like a generic action movie, so I really wasn't expecting much out of this movie. But when I saw the movie in the theaters when it came out back in 2011, I was actually kind of blown away at just how good this movie actually was. And there actually is quite a bit of drama in this movie. The film focuses a lot on the relationship between James Franco's character Will and Caesar, as well as his father, played by John Lithgow. And John Lithgow in this movie gives a genuinely heartbreaking performance. So the film has a lot of drama and a lot of really good character development, which I will admit I was actually genuinely surprised when I first saw the movie. Now, that's not to say that the movie is flawless, because I definitely don't think it's flawless. Like, in the beginning of the movie, there's kind of a plot hole where, now, I don't really buy that those scientists did not realize that Bright Eyes was pregnant in the beginning of the movie. You would think they would be able to figure something like that out, so that's a bit of a plot hole, but I'm willing to forgive that because the rest of the movie is so good. Now, in the film, there are quite a few references to the original film, like, for example, the chimpanzee in the beginning, which gets named Bright Eyes. That's obviously a reference to the original film, because if you remember in the original film, Zira kept calling Taylor, before she found out what his real name is, she kept calling him Bright Eyes. And also, in the film, the character that Tom Felton plays in the movie, who's this asshole kid who tortures the apes at this place where the apes are being kept. There's a scene in the movie where he gets the apes all excited and he starts screaming, "It's a madhouse," which is obviously a reference to a line that Charlton Heston says in the original film. And also in the scene where Caesar finally fights back against this kid, Caesar grabs him and the guy's like, "Get your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape," which is obviously a reference to a very iconic line from the original film. But yeah, I definitely recommend Rise of the Planet of the Apes, and I personally am pretty excited for the sequel to this movie, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. I actually haven't watched too many trailers for it because I'm really trying to keep my expectations low before I see the movie, but the movie comes out on Friday, and I'm hoping to see it this Friday.